Hey everybody, welcome to the Relax and Enjoy Health podcast. I'm Andrew French and I'm your optimal health, wellbeing and balance coach. This is episode number 11 where I'm talking to Masters educated naturopath Louise Westra. Louise has spent 20 years working with women's health and in particular through gut and vaginal biomes. Yes, I said gut. Creating increased energy and resilience. Let's get into the interview and find out what she's got for us today.
We are here with Louise Westra of Health Mastery. All right, Louise and I were just about to start on a massive thing about stereotyping people and getting stuck with a label. So I've just pressed record. We're in the middle of a conversation. I don't know where we're going. We're just going to start. Louise, tell us who you are and what you do.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. So for those people that don't know me, my name is Louise Westra, as Andrew mentioned, and my work is predominantly with women. That's just how it's kind of worked out, although I do work with lots of men folk as well. And it's really around ensuring that those humans I'm working with are not paying a price with their health for the success and achievements that they are gathering through the course of their lifetime. And then because, and I'm sure we'll get into this, because of the way that society is constructed and because of the way that most people think about health, it's really the starting point is ill health when people come to me. They know that they are unwell. But my greatest joy, Andrew, is really having the opportunity to, once we've solved or radically improved somebody's experience in their body and the physicality of their experience, to then work on building what I call their biological bandwidth so that they get to become really the full expression of their biological activity in the most gloriously positive of ways.
Wow. Is that the best introduction ever? Okay. So, I mean, you look at it. I was looking through the notes. I've gone through your Facebook. I'm absolutely terrified by your Facebook page. I mean, within 2 seconds, oh my goodness, we covered Chinese lead levels in clothing. We covered sofas and all the chemicals. We're talking about off gas of all that type of stuff. There's poo, there's vaginas, there's sugar, it's like a plethora, a conglomeration of health, ill health, and it's just like, please tell me, how is someone going to get started? Because you said people come to you with ill health, and the biggest thing that I've found is people know they're overweight. People know they're not well. And that's pretty much, in their eyes, it's because they're fat. Or in their eyes, it's because they work too much and they're stressed. In their eyes, they're in a bad relationship. But ill health, it all comes from so many different things. You know, they could be overweight because of, you know, the biological contaminants that's surrounding them on a daily basis. They could be overweight from just stress from work. They can be overweight for being in a bad relationship. They can be unwell because of every single thing. So where do you start?
Yeah, that's so true. And I think one of the massive challenges we have in this kind of age of information is that there is so much information, and yet at the same time, people are not taking that information and putting it into action in a way that is appropriate for them. So you've got the nuance, and one of my go-to phrases is "it depends," because the reality is that exactly what you're saying, if somebody is unhappy in their body, they know that they are carrying too much mass, it is uncomfortable, it is having a knock-on effect to their biological health, to their energy levels, you know, they are pre-diabetic and so on and so forth. we've got to go below the label of obesity and actually start to unpick the root causes in a general sense, but more importantly, in that scenario with a one-to-one client, in a way that is meaningful for them and their relationship and their story. And it's so the answer is it depends. I guess that's the short answer.
Depends.
Because also, yeah, you so rightly say, and I've done, as you've seen, because you've looked at my Facebook page latterly, is that I've been really drilling down on the sugar side of things. I don't ever want to demonize sugar, but again, we've lost sight of the fact that a small amount of sugar in a chocolate bar or a cake that we've made, or we know what's in it because we know the person that made it, that those things are actually meaningless, by which I mean that they are meaningless in the sense that they have an adverse effect on our health outcomes, as long as they are part of an overwhelmingly, diverse, mainly natural diet. Whereas what I see time and time again is this oscillation by humans between what I call the all or nothing, whereby they are, it's about clean eating and going fully keto or paleo or whatever the fad of the day is, whatever their best friends told them that is working for them, without understanding that within their own biological bandwidth, within their own capacity at that time, they are going to be white knuckling it and amplifying their stress hormone. So even if they manage to do it for a number of weeks or a number of months, there will be a cost to be paid at the end of that, which sends them rebounding back. And whether it's 6 months, a year, or 2 years down the track, they will ultimately be back at the beginning. And because that cycle is often something that happens over 1 or 2 years, it isn't always easy for a human that's in it to A, recognize it, and B, extract themselves from it without an advocate to them, for them, which is, again, one of the ways that I describe myself is I am consistently alongside my clients, talking to them about, well, listen, is that the right choice for you right now? Maybe we need to think about, really building that bandwidth in a passive but really impactful way, whilst, not getting overly focused on something that is a popular choice that, Aunt Flo's told you's worked for her.
Exactly. So people going into it without a plan. But like you said, just getting off the sugar, that could be a two-year rebound. Is that what you're saying there in regards to that?
Yeah. So one of the things that I see all the time is, and I saw this again yesterday on social media, and I shouldn't blame Aunt Flo, because actually mainly these days it's to do with what people are seeing on places like Instagram, because again, humans have this perception that if somebody is important enough on Instagram to have X number of followers, they are therefore some kind of authority, when that is often not the case at all. And of course, vested interest is in there. So,
of course,
going back to what you were saying though about sugar, I saw this yesterday, someone that I know online talking about how they've never been to the gym in their life before. It's the busiest time they've ever had in their life from a business perspective. And they've decided that they are going to go to the gym 4 times a week and start following this particular process around health and fitness from a book that they've bought. Now, I am all about people realizing the potential of their biology on every possible, and how that shows up in every possible level. I'm all about building strength. I do not believe in the idea that as we age chronologically, we therefore become weaker. I am stronger at the end of my 40s than I was at the end of my 30s.
Mm-hmm.
But let's get real. Like, are we allowed to swear?
Oh, fuck it. Go for it.
Fantastic. Well, you know, I lived in Australia for 14 years, right? So, you know,
Mate, yeah, copper, yeah, you'll be right. Go for it, love.
Exactly. So the reality is that whilst this individual may well be able to sustain that for a period of time, if it is not part of their habitual behaviors, and if, as I strongly suspect, because I have a little bit of an idea of what else is going on in their life,
Mm-hmm.
they are probably not going to be able to maintain significant changes in behavior, because that requires a very large amount of biological activity, of adaptation, to be able to make those changes happen and then to be able to sustain them. So what I see time and time again is people embarking on this idea that, you know, health needs to be something that we adhere to in a dramatic, really impactful way, but they can't actually maintain it, because what they needed to do was start with something much smaller, build it into their life,
Exactly.
and then build upon it, right? And
yeah,
this is
it's
one of my
non-exercise
great
activity.
frustrations, right? It's one of my great frustrations. How can you expect to go from never really exercising, certainly not in a gym situation,
Mm-hmm.
to suddenly being there 4 times a week when you have a young family, when you are running multiple businesses, when you are managing a house renovation, and you already are telling people at times that you're very, very tired? Like, it's fucked up. The way that people start on their health journey, it's
I mean, we're
fucked
looking
up.
at the
When it
cortisol
doesn't
level
work,
for starters.
right? And then they say, oh, being healthy, it's too hard.
No, it's not too hard. So number one, you haven't dealt with your cortisol levels. So you're at your maximum fat gaining capacity. You're at your minimum sleep ability. So you're not going to be rested. You're not going to recuperate. You're going to be sore all the time. You're going to be grumpy. It's going to reduce your capacity in every other area. And this is just what I'm seeing from the outside. So, you know, I don't even know what's going through your mind, you know, as a naturopath of, you know, 20 plus years. You know, so that's, yes, he's destined for failure.
It is, and it's sad, you know. It's really sad. I actually was talking to a dear friend of mine this morning, who's a very, very well qualified, highly experienced psychotherapist, trauma specialist, proper trauma specialist. And, you know, I actually had a little cry with her, because I said I'd been seeing recently online, you know, I speak to so many women who are really struggling with their relationship with food. It's one of the things that often they don't come to me for that, but it's part of the bigger picture, and it's part of what we do over a longer period of time. And it makes me really sad, because I see, again, women online that I know, perhaps have fleetingly been my client, or talk openly about their own challenges with, you know, food and so on. And then you see them with their children, with their grandchildren, perpetuating exactly the same cycle. And everyone in the comments laughing about, oh, isn't that a huge bowl of ice cream? And oh, he's going to have you up later, isn't he, with all that coloring and yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, it literally, I do have to sometimes take a step back, because I don't want to say it breaks my heart, because obviously that's a self-perpetuating thing to say. But, you know, it's so sad, and it's so unnecessary. Why, you know, it's just spending all this energy unpacking that ourselves, but not then continuing to unpack it with the generations that are behind us, so that they don't have to go through the same fucking cycle, wasting their precious time and energy, because, you know, you've just taught them the same things and then laughed about it as if it's harmless, when it's not.
Well, no, it's not harmless. I mean, these things change people's lives. I mean, okay, so when I was personal training like 10 years ago, so we're looking at my clients, the women were full on busy. they're full-on busy women. They got full-time jobs. They come home. They're dealing with the children. They're getting the children's homework done. They're getting the chores done around the house. They're making dinner. They're making sure everyone's fed. The husband gets home, immediately goes to sit down because he's had a big day. And, so she's stuck. She's getting dinner ready. Everyone eats. Then she has to get the kids to clean up. She has to go through the fights of making them clean up. She's got to make sure that they're getting ready for bed. Meanwhile, she's calling out to him and he's just like, what? Oh, yeah. And so it's no help there whatsoever. And I used to call it, they've got this little Tim Tam size hole inside them, which, so they fill it up with a Tim Tam biscuit, which is like a little internal hug. And, it makes them feel better momentarily. And so then they come up to 9 o'clock at night. The kids are finally in bed. She's finally sitting down. He's asleep on the couch. And he's like, hands her the remote control when he wakes up. Here you go, love. You watch your show. And so that's the only, that's the only time she actually gets to sit down. And then, half an hour later, he's like, oh, let's go to bed, and they go to bed. And then all of a sudden he wants to go tap, 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 hey, babe. And it's just like, and we were talking about stereotypes, but this was almost every female client of mine that was age 40s and 50s. And all of a sudden they just got to the point where they wanted to be the girl they used to be. They wanted to be the woman they used to be. They wanted to be, where they lost their identity because they were the mother, they were the wife, the spouse, and they had lost who they were. They wanted someone to look at them for who they are and open a door for them. They wanted, to feel like their own person again. And, and that's coming to me for exercise was the bare minimum of it. I mean, there were days they'd rock up. You'd take one look at them and you say, okay, Cheryl, we're just going to turn this light off and we're going to go for a walk, love. Because, and then next minute, she's pouring out her heart and soul on the walk around the block. Because all of a sudden you're trusted, you've got nothing to do with their life, they can talk to you and they can walk away knowing that, they are lighter. And, we're talking about those stereotypes, but they're stereotypes for a reason, I guess.
Yeah, and actually, Andrew, I mean, it's obviously no surprise to me, having worked in this space predominantly with women for 20 years, that was and still is, unfortunately, a very real experience for so many women. And I don't know if you saw when you were having a bit of a scout around, but that's one of the reasons that last year I wrote my book. And my book is called You First. Yeah. And that's, again, one of the reasons that I call myself an advocate for women to women, because I still don't believe within most of the certainly Western society, and that is my, main experience of growing up in the UK and then living in Oz for 14 years, is that women are still kind of conditioned to need to have all the balls in the air. And women perpetuate the problem by referring to each other as superwoman. And when a woman does crash and burn, she's invited to pull herself up almost by the bootstraps still, which actually I found out yesterday is a term that was used to refer to something that was impossible.
Exactly. Pulling yourself up over the fence by your bootstraps.
Right, which again, it's lost. It's like the similar, or it's not similar, but the phrase feed a cold, starve a fever, which is actually, if you feed a cold, you will have to starve a fever. So, the thing is that these meanings lose their sense over time. So it's very important that we keep checking back to the original source for these things. But my point being that what happens is, a woman does collapse in a heap, and that's usually often the only time that, certain people in her life may notice that she finally needs some help. She picks herself back up, and then, she looks around, and the majority of the women in her life are kind of cheering her on and saying, yeah, come on, love, that's it. Be more resilient. It's not how many times you fall down. It's how many times you pick yourself back up again. I'm like, that's fucking endurance. That's not resilience.
That
right?
was something else we've got to discuss, building true resilience. Yes.
Right. So it just, and so it goes on. And as I say, it's really important to me that when I'm working with clients, that I am giving them the opportunity, once they've got the space to do so, and they've got the capacity, they've got that biological bandwidth, to really think about the ways that they may be perpetuating the cycle, so that they're not then unconsciously, because it is mainly unconscious, they're not unconsciously doing it with their next generation, with their own children. And that's how I parent, and it's fucking hard work. That's for sure. But even actually this morning, my husband and I were having a conversation around, what's going on with our eldest. And I was like, I don't think what you're saying, I understand where you're coming from, and that conversation may need to be had, but now is not the time, the place, because this whole idea of get up, get to school, we've got to start, and whether it's school or work or whatever, we've got to start digging a little bit deeper, but underneath, and we this is obviously where we started, underneath these labels of, well, for instance, I feel anxious today. Okay, let's not stop there and go, well, I'm anxious. Well, it's normal in my family. Everyone's a worrier. So therefore, I'll normalize it and I'll just keep going. Let's have a think about, well, what is creating that biologically? What's creating that anxiety? So a lot of my work is looking at genomics, looking at things like the microbiome, as you know, the connection between the second brain of the gut and what goes on cognitively, emotionally, and so on for us. And also looking at what's happening in our blueprint when it comes to anxiety around our neurotransmitters. So for instance, do we have a higher sensitivity to adrenaline, for instance? Do we have an inability to really convert, for those of you that know, glutamate into, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter, into GABA, which is our calming? And if we have that higher sensitivity of adrenaline, and if we have a bit of a glitch and less ability to move from an excitatory neurotransmitter into a calming neurotransmitter, then we are likely to have a more heightened experience, which then has been labeled anxiety. But if we can learn about what specific nutrients we then need to really pay attention to, if we can also enhance the function of our gut to make sure we are producing more serotonin within the intestinal tract, because that is where the majority of it is made, then lo and behold, we'll be in a position whereby we have less of our biological bandwidth being taken up by the experience of anxiety as our default setting. And then we have more choice in the way that we get to live out our life.
Okay, now you've said
freedom.
Biological bandwidth about 1 million times. Please explain that for me so that other people are going to understand.
Yeah, so for me, what creates our biological bandwidth? So our biological bandwidth is our capacity. So I think the first thing for people listening to understand is that the way that we feel, the way that we think, the choices we make, the ways that we behave are not solely driven by what goes on up here. A lot of the way that we think, feel, and behave is driven by what's going on in our biology throughout all the systems of our body. Therefore, the better those systems are functioning, the better we feel. And when a challenge arises, the more capacity, the more bandwidth we have to cope with that, rather than it kind of chipping away at us until we get to a point where we are, on the floor with a mental health disorder or diagnosed with a medical condition. Because again, what people don't realize is that being diagnosed with a medical condition means that things have been going awry in your biology for many, many, many years in the vast majority of cases. So if we can learn more about what has the capacity to go awry in our biology, and if we can keep tipping the scales towards that biology working better and better and better in our organ systems, then we have more bandwidth. And more bandwidth means more energy, whether that energy is emotional energy, whether that is physical energy, or whether that is, emotional and mental energy for the challenges of living, parenting, being in the world with other humans.
No, exactly. No, I love this. So I've done, my wife's been studying acupuncture, and as a result, so I sort of study alongside her, and I chose Qigong and Chinese 5-element theory and everything. And the whole thing about Qigong is, being able to move qi and energy through your body. And the whole thing is, it's not just energy. You're looking at ultimately, like you just exactly like you're saying, all our emotions and everything we feel and everything we think and everything we're experiencing in our body is just a bunch of protein, carbohydrates, vitamins, minerals. So anger, I just love the way anger is located in the liver, and the liver is where we process all toxins and everything like that. You're looking at sorrow and everything. It's in our lungs and our ability to breathe and our ability to get rid of carbon dioxide. So all these different processes, and like doing that Qigong exercise and everything, literally wringing out your organs to force all those toxins into the body to be utilized, to be able to be processed by the body, the excretory functions and everything. And that's just the physical aspect of it. It's got nothing to do with the energy or the woo-woo or the spiritual, but like you're saying, you're increasing your bandwidth, or you're increasing your capacity to deal with all the other things in your life. And I love something that I've always said is, like, mental health really is our capacity to deal with what life throws at us. So, we have all these, everyone, I did a talk one time, and I had all these different containers. I had jugs and I had boxes, and I was pouring water into all of them. And you've got a cup which is full in 2 seconds. You've got a jug which takes quite a lot of water. You've got a bucket which takes even more water again. But if you take the water as, okay, this is your 12-year-old son giving you a hard time. This is your husband, not putting his underpants in the clothes hamper. This is the bill that comes in. And all of a sudden this water it's now overflowing onto the floor. However, this bucket here has just got heaps more room, and the bandwidth is increased on those items. So they have more energy to deal with all those, all the requests that life's giving it, I guess.
Yeah. And exactly that. And going back to what you were saying about, previously with your female clients, for me, what happens is that, unless or until we consciously know that we're building that bandwidth, everything comes at a cost. And it comes at a cost that we feel chipping away at us. And the problem, one of the big problems we've got within the Western paradigm of health is that actually it's nothing to do with health. It's all built around sickness, as I know you're fully aware. So what happens is that unless or until there's something so seriously wrong with you, what tends to happen is you're offered an antidepressant, right? Which is just, the number of women that come to me and say, my GP isn't listening, he or she just offered me an antidepressant.
With no plan, no goal to get off it.
Not even knowing
nothing.
If serotonin is an issue in that person's biology. I mean, it should be illegal, really, to be medicating. And this is the problem. The medicalization of mental health is a huge, and this is slightly a tangent, but it's a huge fucking problem, because since the 80s here in the UK, and I can go off on a tangent about new capitalism, but it's probably for another day. But if you look at the rise in prescriptions of psychiatric medications, such as the SSRIs, the most popular prescribed antidepressant, and I know it's a big issue in Oz because remember I lived there for 14 years, that those levels have been rising since the 1980s, since new capitalism really was brought into government. But mental health outcomes have been worsening ever since. But again, we've got this black and white framework that most people have never thought beyond. You know, you've talked about 5 elements and whatnot within the Chinese tradition, but within the Australian and the UK general population, they don't have, unless they've grown up, you know, in maybe Nimbin or somewhere, you know, up on the East Coast towards Byron, they probably haven't grown up with this idea of there is a different way of thinking about health. And that was one of the things that really struck me coming from the UK and ending up ultimately in Oz. That's where I did my naturopathic training, because I was finding like, here's a different way of thinking about health. I don't have to wait until I'm sick and need some kind of medical intervention. I can actually start with the idea, and at that time I had a number of health conditions, including really severe IBS. I don't have to just sit with this label of IBS and I've been told I have to live with it. There is another system of medicine, another paradigm that says, let's take that label and let's unpack it. I invite you to learn more about what is happening in your biology, what is happening in your gut, and what is the knock-on effect of that to the rest of your body, and how is that then draining your bandwidth and leaving you at 20 odd years of age feeling like you can't actually get off of your sofa in between the time you have to go and study or work, and you can barely even lift your doona or duvet for the UK peeps, you know, lift it up without feeling like, you know, it's a Herculean task.
Exactly, and the doctor doesn't understand it. I mean, I doubt a doctor knows what a lectin is, you know, so that's it's insane.
And actually, you know what? I think in reality, that would be okay if the allopathic doctors knew their place, right? So if they knew, if they were at the tail end of the conversation, so if we had a system, I mean, this is obviously nirvana to some degree, if we had a system where people's first port of call was a naturopath, or a naturopath working alongside a doctor, or a truly integrative, you know, medic, then the first conversation would be about, right, well, I need to see a food journal. Right, well, let's test your microbiome.
Exactly.
Let's see what your secretory IgA is doing so that we know what the conversation is or isn't at the lining of your gut that is driving your immune system to send out inflammatory signaling all around your body, and leading, before we refer you to a rheumatologist that puts you on a drug that after several years will actually cause more problems in your body than it ever did to rectify the situation in the first place.
How about we just get medicine back to what it's supposed to be for the last 5,000 years rather than the last 200 years? You know,
yeah, but then there wouldn't be any money. There wouldn't be any money, Andrew.
Let food be your medicine. Let's just start there. All right, so let's go. Talk to me. The word genomics. What does that entail? What does that mean?
Sure. So it's really looking at your genetic blueprint whilst also understanding the influence of that blueprint, or the influences, I should say, on that blueprint. So again, within the majority of the Western mindset, there's this idea that if you have a genetic problem, it is a done deal. Nothing else to be done. And that's because, sadly, there are, children born, infants born every year that do have congenital illnesses that are often associated with a significant genetic issue. And those issues are often life altering and or life shortening. And then the other main place that people hear about genetics is in relation to breast cancer. So the BRCA1 and 2. But what, again, is completely ignored is that in the vast majority of cases, our genetic blueprint is really a map. And it's up to us to take that map with us on a journey. And depending on where we go on that journey and the influences that we come across in our environment, so the influences of food, the influences of, chemicals that we perhaps come into contact with, the people around us and their varying levels of toxicity, stress, the jobs that we choose, whether we choose a job that will keep us up all night and dramatically disrupt our circadian health, for instance, all those things through the course of a lifetime will exert their influence on our genetic blueprint. And that's really what genomics is. So it's using our genetic blueprint to really empower people to learn more, to again ensure that they are aware about where their particular glitches are. But it's those glitches over time and the combination of those glitches, multiple glitches, that have the ability to perhaps cause disease over the course of a lifetime, rather than one single thing and then, everything else really is almost dismissed. So to use the example that you brought up earlier around the idea of chemical exposure, yes, it's absolutely imperative that we continue to, it's ridiculous that we've got to do this, but we have to fight with our governments to bring in more regulation to basically hold big corporations accountable for polluting the environment, usually in vulnerable populations that are far away from the customers that buy those clothes. But at the same time, understanding that the example that I used, which was an excess level of lead that would have been in the dye for a leather jacket, that actually every day of your life, you are coming into contact with chemicals that have the potential to harm you, again, usually over time, insidiously over time, because of your own genomic vulnerabilities, if you like. So what I mean by that is that when it comes to the liver, there are different detoxification pathways. If you have one typo or glitch in one of those detoxification pathways, it may not be an issue at all. However, what I think people would be what they should do ideally is to find out what the potential implications of having a glitch in that detoxification pathway means, because it could be that certain chemicals in their particular body are not detoxified appropriately, and that will then leave them having more influence, exerting more inflammation, potential for inflammation in their body. And also, if they have, which I had very recently with a client, almost all the detoxification pathways are struggling, in inverted commas, to some degree, to deal with this body burden that is, something like 50,000 more chemicals now in our environments on a day-to-day basis compared to 2 generations ago. So my grandparents, post-World War II, right? So when a doctor says, oh, but your liver is perfectly capable of detoxifying itself, that I call BS on that now, because maybe 2 generations ago that was true, but these days we've got chemicals coming off our, sofas, because our governments have decided that we need to have anti-inflammatory chemicals on them. Now, I wonder, this is the cynic in me, or the skeptic, I wonder who has been barracking in government for those chemicals to go into, those sofas.
Yeah, but the thing that got me was just something you don't even think of. Over time, those chemicals break down and are released as dust into our environment, which means we're breathing it in, we're treading it everywhere, we're eating it, and we're just absorbing this stuff through our skin.
You think about an infant who is cruel, or a toddler, and they're down at the floor level, breathing that in from the floor, and nobody's really talking about it. And the reason they're not talking about it, Andrew, or one of the reasons, is because in the mainstream, again, the accepted medical paradigm, the idea of what is toxic and the approach to toxicology is still very, very, is dated. So the idea is still very much that unless you ingest something and it makes you acutely ill, it is not a problem. They do not understand this idea of body burden accumulating over a lifetime, and nor are they in a position they tend to not, to still be a bit black and white with the genetic side of things.
And dare we say the levels would be sort of have a dollar value against it in regards to government.
I think, again, people don't realize that the vast majority of companies that are making these products, so a lot of the chemicals are let's just put it this way. It is not good business to have people experiencing the full potential of health, because they don't buy drugs. It means governments don't need to buy as many drugs, or people don't need to pay for prescriptions. So it is actually against the capitalist, and certainly the new capitalist way of doing things, for people to be well. Yep. And the good news for industry, for the pharmaceutical industry, is that the more drugs somebody ingests, the more drugs they tend to ingest, because as the biological bandwidth decreases, and I'm not saying, I don't want anyone to misunderstand me, I'm not saying that there isn't a time and a place for medication.
Oh, 100%.
Right? Everyone, I'm sure, I know myself, probably you, everyone watching will have had some situation where I've had times in my life where I've been absolutely grateful for the intervention of the medical system and the medical personnel that intervened in acute care situation. But that's where the system excels.
100%. When you have an acute care situation, those guys are the ones I want on my team, because they are 100%, they're going to keep you alive. They're going to operate on you to make you better. They're going to fix what's going on right now. However, it seems in chronic care situations, they don't necessarily have your best interest at heart.
Well, the trouble is that it's all fed down from, it's a situation where, let's face it, your busy GP on a day-to-day basis is flat out, right?
Yeah.
So they are relying on organizations like in Australia, the TGA, here in the UK, the MHRA, so the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Authority, to tell them that the things that they are prescribing and that within their framework should be prescribed for somebody presenting with a certain group of symptoms, that those things are safe. And I had a rant about this the other day, actually, on Facebook, I'm sure. These organizations are a revolving door for the pharmaceutical industry. So you will not usually find a member of the MHRA, the TGA in Oz, or the FDA in America who hasn't been involved in the pharmaceutical industry in some way, shape, or form. And that means, to give an example, a recent example, And I appreciate for some people it may be a contentious one, but I just think, you know, I have to be contentious for people to really, you know, be aware of these things, is that here in the UK over the last 12 months, at least 12 months, a woman called Dr. Tess Lowry has written to our MHRA twice on 2 occasions, asking them to desist from the rollout of the COVID jabs in the younger populations. So the under 5s here, it's not recommended, but I think it's the above 5s to 11 and up until, you know, 16, whatever. The outcomes for those age groups are actually horrific when it comes to the COVID jabs. And that, as I say, it shouldn't be contentious because it's there in the literature, right? It's there in the evidence base.
Yeah, you can find it. The UK government's actually been pretty good with publishing that stuff, that information. I can actually get UK stuff more readily than I can get Australian stuff.
Yeah. However, the problem is, so Tess Lowry owns, I don't know the name of the company, but she owns a global research company who provide data. So rather than the British government or the Australian government or the World Health Organization having to trawl through it themselves, they employ Tess's company, and she's not the only company out there, but they employ her and her team to go through the data and to tell them what they need. So she, again, is, you know, like, there's nobody better qualified to do this work. So she and her team have done that. They've shown without, you know, question that the outcomes are terrible for adverse effects versus actual any positive outcome for that age group, and she's been ignored.
Yeah, 100%. Like la not listening.
I mean, what other conclusion is there other than, because the MHRA has been, and it's funded by the pharmaceutical industry. So what other conclusion can you possibly come to? And again, it's important people know this stuff. It doesn't mean that you can't take a medication when you need it, but just understanding how the system and the structure actually works, so that you can make more informed choices and understand that, you know, there is a narrative around every aspect of our health that feeds a new capitalist agenda, which means making as much money as possible off the medicalization of ill health. All
right. We've got so many tangents we can go down.
We haven't even talked about the microbiome, really.
No, it's digestive health and the microbiome. We've got it right here. So and that was just me asking you about genomics. Okay, so using a combination of traditional and genomic approaches. So what would you call a traditional approach then?
Well, I guess sorry, say that again.
Okay, so we were going through when I first asked you to be on creating increased energy levels, building true resilience using a combination of traditional and genomic approaches. So now we've got an idea of genomic approaches. Yeah. What would a traditional approach be?
Is the naturopathic approach.
I tell you what, you're going to be leashed in like a Rottweiler, you do.
I know. So that is really the naturopathic side of things, which I consider to be more of an art form. So I really love the opportunity that I have with clients, Andrew, to give them the chance to tell their story. Because in the naturopathic way of working with people, it's really about the details of that story. So the way that they talk about how they feel, the way they talk about the way that they think, that, you know, their moods, the way that they talk about the choices that they're making, often despite knowing that that's not the choice they want to make. It's those details as a naturopath that give me the information about the systems of the body that are needing more support, more nourishing, and so on. And then should they want to, it depends really on a variety of factors, but should they want to then invest in the testing side of things, that can be sometimes the genomic side of things, and or it can be related predominantly for me to the microbiological side of things. And as you know, because I work predominantly with women, I look at not just the gut microbiome, but often we're looking at the vaginal microbiome as well, because so many women do have problems with things like chronic unrelenting thrush and
because of the imbalance of lactobacillus.
You got it. So you already know. You know the answer. You know the answer.
And I didn't even say vagina.
The difference between the gut and the vagina when it comes to the microbiomes is that in the gut, you want as much diversity as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the vagina, you want really as little living and, taking advantage and having its own party.
Yeah, I love that post. That was awesome. All right, everyone, check out Louise Westra, Health Mastery. Go through her Facebook page. Honestly, it's worth the read. All right, so digestive health and the microbiome. I love the fact that they call the gut the second brain. Are you with us? Are you okay? All right. So
yeah,
I just like. All right. So when working with the qigong and everything like that, the qi is stored in the lower abdomen, and I just love the fact that the gut as the second brain to the fact that it can be totally correlated, through the vagus nerve all the way through to the actual brain. And I just love the way that they can take a sample of your gut and let you know whether you're going to have Parkinson's, just because it's just fascinating. I just find the whole thing absolutely fascinating. So, all right. So how are people going to get good digestive health?
Well, it depends.
It depends.
It depends on where they are starting.
Okay,
well,
let's start.
It really does, because
we started this out with sugar. So how about we've got someone with a high sugar diet? So how are they going to get a better digestive thing? Because one thing I've read recently is the fact that if you have a high sugar diet, you're going to have bacteria that thrive in a high sugar environment. They're going to want more sugar. They're going to tell you to have more sugar. And if you all of a sudden, like the gentleman who's going to start going to the gym 4 days a week, he's going to start eating greens and he's going to start eating protein. You don't have the gut flora for that, and you're going to feel quite poorly.
Yeah, that's so true. And this is why, again, it's so important to really start. This is why I say it depends. I know it's annoying, but it really does, because if somebody fronts up and they're like, I want to cut sugar right out of my diet immediately, and I'm going to go all in with, greens, morning, noon, and night, as you so rightly say, all of a sudden, they're probably going to find themselves digestively quite uncomfortable, because it takes time for the internal ecosystem to really adjust. So I know some people advocate for a complete sugar.
Mm-hmm.
Are you there?
Yeah.
I know some people advocate for cut it out immediately, stop all of it. But because most of my clients have also got, working lives, family lives, they can't just go off and completely use all their bandwidth to detox from, or remove sugar from their body. It's really a case of starting out with, well, firstly, where are the opportunities for us to start stabilizing your blood sugar? So that, for me, it doesn't even necessarily start with the microbiome. It starts with, where can we stabilize you? And where is the best opportunity to make sure that we reduce your craving for sugar? And yes, that can be to do with what's going on in that internal ecosystem, but it also is going to be to do with things often like making sure that we're starting the day with a breakfast that suits us, that is probably has some kind of protein in it. Because I see time and time again, Andrew, people, you know, here in the UK, particularly in the colder areas, oh, I know, I'm going to be healthy, so I'll start the day with porridge. But actually, they don't have the capacity to break the starch down properly. So they unwittingly send themselves off on a blood sugar roller coaster for the rest of the day. And again, like, what the fuck? This is supposed to be a healthy choice. Why is this like worse than when I eat a breakfast bar? So again, it really, and this is where the naturopathic part comes in. The art form is really getting to understand what somebody's preferences are, what their lifestyle looks like, what their day looks like, because there might be an opportunity 2 days a week to start them with some protein, you know, a protein rich breakfast. But somebody else might actually, the best place for them to start might be to ensure that they get a 12-hour fast overnight. That's why I annoyingly say it depends.
Well, that's
and
okay.
Then,
and the cool thing is,
sorry,
this is going to lead me down to my number 3 item on your Facebook page, poo. Because I think people need to know that 1/3 of their poop is dead bacteria from that microbiome. And the thing that blows my mind is, like, say they have chosen to do their sugar cleanse, and all of a sudden we have a massive bacteria die-off, which means our body is actually also dealing with a toxic load from the amount of bacteria that has just suddenly died within our system. So, yeah. People need I mean, come and see one of us professionals, please, before you do anything crazy. But, you know, I mean,
right, because again, to give an example on the genomic side of things, if somebody decides suddenly to radically overhaul their diet, start juicing every day, you know, get out all the and when I say juicing, I mean I'm talking about what I call proper juicing, not
proper vegetables,
you know, oranges and pineapple and tropical fruits. I'm talking about like proper green, not particularly sweet juicing.
And what
they do is, beetroot is amazing. I love beetroot. But if they haven't got the capacity through that second phase, those detoxification pathways in the liver, and they all of a sudden are ingesting all this stuff that the body's like, I'm sorry, I don't have the capacity to deal with that, they can make themselves very, very unwell, even if it's not, you know, it's not going to be probably lasting too long, but it's definitely not going to be particularly exactly, for in the short term.
Yeah, honestly, we've all sat there going, dear God in heaven. And especially after like 3 days juicing diet with beetroot, you have to remind yourself that you have not been shot.
Yeah, every time.
All right,
every time.
Let me go through my list. Indoor patern. But okay, yes, another thing I pulled out of the Facebook page, the body burdens. Okay, such as medications, pesticides, herbicides, which comes through with your liver detoxification process and everything like that. You know, how can people be more aware of these? I love the way it's called body burdens.
Yeah, that's actually, I think it's a functional medicine term, and I've got mixed feelings about functional medicine for various reasons. But the point is that it is that burden. It is that every time we're exposed, our body has to decide what it has the capacity to do with that chemical. And in many, many cases, it doesn't have the bandwidth because people don't know what their body does and doesn't need. They don't know where their glitches are. So they don't know that they need to support their body to detoxify and render these chemicals, as benign as possible, and certainly remove them from the body as much as possible. And so those chemical byproducts, and often the metabolites from the influence of those being partially broken down, they tend to circulate through the body and cause even more havoc. And that havoc shows up from an energy perspective by draining our energy, from a hormonal perspective, which may be more obvious in women than men. But it really gathers, I describe it as, and it's not like this because we probably now are, well, we know we're inheriting a body burden from our parents. We know from testing breast milk that there are, dioxin and we, in breast milk, we know that there is plastic in blood. So, as babies are born, they are now inheriting a body burden. So they're born with a couple of suitcases that have started to already fill up with some of that. And then through the course of our lifetime, through being in cars, being next to roads, through having furniture, as we've discussed, those chemicals, drying out, off-gassing, through ingesting pesticides, insecticides, herbicides on our food, petrochemicals on our skin, in our mouths, and so on. That
maybe
gathers,
don't do that on TV.
we collect that, and it weighs us down in those metaphorical suitcases. And then what happens is, in the latter stage of our lives, the tendency is that we start to be diagnosed with, conditions, syndromes, and so on. And the vast majority of those have their root causes in things like our genomics, so our genetic blueprint, and the way that it's been influenced by everything that we've come into contact with, both internally and externally, over the course of our lifetime. And unbeknown to us, has been tipping the balance. And as our cells turn over every, cycle of 7 years, that biological bandwidth is decreasing until it reaches a kind of critical point where people cannot ignore the messages from their body anymore. Often they've ignored the more subtle messages for years. And then they find themselves undergoing a plethora of tests. And unfortunately, then that's often a situation where they are diagnosed with a medical condition that then goes down a pharmaceutical, perhaps a surgical route. And again, I'm not saying that those things can't be helpful, but we need to be more open and transparent about the role that we play in that process, because we have a lot more power than I think we allow ourselves to believe.
Well, I think also, but it's like through lack of knowledge, my people perish. That's that old saying. And I love the way you said that we have a biological burden from our parents, because in my family, I was conceived and born before my father went to Vietnam. And I am now 50. I am very strong. I have no negative health concerns. I haven't been sick, and I've just had my first cold last week in about 5 to 10 years. I don't get sick. I have stamina out the wazoo. It's fantastic. My two brothers, who were conceived after Vietnam, my middle brother, he was born, one testicle didn't come down from his body. He has had thyroid cancer. He is overweight. He has a lot of legitimate health concerns. And my youngest brother has a lot of mental health concerns, as well as physical health concerns, which have manifested more and more as he's gotten older. And it's the difference. Again, we're talking Vietnam. I'm assuming we're talking Agent Orange. We're talking about all the pesticides, defoliants and everything. And this is just the difference I know of in my family. And we're talking a microscopically small sperm at one point, which has got the power of a nuclear bomb to affect someone's life 50 years down the track. And this is only that, like you said, this is the beginning of their suitcase.
Yeah,
and
exactly
and
right.
if they, so I love, I've forgotten the guy, but he was saying how our genetics is the gun, however our lifestyle choices is the trigger. And so it's always up to us and the way we live our lives and the decisions we make, the health decisions, food, beverage, our habits and everything. And those are the decisions that will actually activate the triggers within our system. So how do we teach people more? Honestly, it's just like, I don't think the adverts on television going, eat more fruit, is doing any good.
Well, I mean, at one stage I would have said that I thought Australia was doing better than the UK. Certainly when we moved here, the government recommendation for 5 a day, that's fruits and vegetables. Oz had 2 fruits, 5 vegetables. But of course it's not quite that simple. The problem is that there is so much vested interest, as we've discussed, around making money from the medical system, that unless or until we divest the vested interest that our politicians have in making money from, because a lot of them, certainly here, one of the things that came out early on in the pandemic was that our, God, I can't even remember his name. I've tried to block it from my memory bank, but that he and another one of the government advisors for health both had, hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of stocks in the pharmaceutical companies that were tasked with, trying to provide a viable injectable solution, because of course they aren't vaccines, as we know. But, unless or until we really can remove or reduce those influences, Andrew, we need a massive grassroots uprising to make it clear to our governments that we do not accept this state of affairs. And the reality is that the vast majority of people are so, I believe, indoctrinated to think that they are not the masters and mistresses of their own health, that getting them to a point where they see what's really going on, it's not going to be something that's going to happen in my lifetime, I don't believe. And I wish I could tell you something different.
And I love, yes, Facebook post, it's Friday, so let's talk about vaginas. You literally wrote that on your wall. I had to get that in there. All right, so we've got, it depends. We've got we've had labels unpacking the root causes. We've had sugar. We've got Western society, women's social, societal construction. The starting point is ill health. We've got biological bandwidth. We've got our capacity of feel, think, behave, driven by our biology. Genomics, we have more bandwidth is more energy. Somewhere in there we got glutamate and GABA, and but people's level of toxicity. So my notes are all over the shop. This has just been an absolute conglomeration of stuff. Anyway, so question 3: what are your clients' biggest struggles? We're up here. Look, we're here.
No, surely not. Surely, I think we'll have to come back for another day.
We are definitely going to have to come back for another day. I reckon I'm going to call it. I'm going to call it there, and I'm definitely going to have you come back, Louise.
A kaleidoscope of health.
It is definitely a kaleidoscope. I tell you what, there is more colours. Yeah, but the thing I've found is with you, a slight twist and it's all changed.
Yeah, but that's the kaleidoscope, right?
Yep, exactly. And every single person had one as a kid, and they were the best thing ever. All right, I'm
Well,
calling it.
I'm
I'm going to
hoping,
press the.
yeah.
I'm going to press the end button. I will. All right, Louise, you're an absolute legend. I'm definitely richer for talking to you today. Thank you so much. I'm definitely having you back.
Thank
Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me, Andrew. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
All right, I'm pressing the button. It's going to kick us violently out into the cold, and I will talk to you later.
Everyone who tuned in today, thanks for listening to today's Relax and Enjoy Health podcast with Louise Westra. I've been your host, Andrew French, for optimal health, well-being and balance. If you want to find out more about Louise, you can find her at louisewestra.com or on Facebook at Louise Westra Health Mastery. And if you want the bullet points from today's podcast or even for some free resources, check us out at relaxenjoyhealth.com.au. If you've enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or even leave us a review and a rating. To catch all the latest from us, you can follow us on Facebook at Relax Enjoy Health. But for now, stay sane and have a great day.